Welcome to the last Northern Business podcast before the summer hiatus, and welcome to our regular discussion with people in the north of England who lead businesses and they employ people and have ideas to help our economy grow. And particularly today, it's a special because we're going to be discussing something that could hinder our economy growing. The Northern Business podcast is produced by Recognition PR. We serve dozens of companies in different sectors across the country, some of which contribute to this programme. We're kindly sponsored by Virtue Motors PLC, one of the top automotive retailers in the UK, with a network of dealerships representing some of the world's most popular brands. I'm Graham Robin. In the studio today, we have Darcy Delish-Cool, and she is the IT Security and Compliance Officer at the big brand Foot Asylum. And down the line, we have the former Defence Secretary for the UK, Sir Michael Fallon. And also Neil Frost, who's the CEO of the cyber security experts Bob's Business. Now, this is a special because, Darcy, your business is doing very well, but all businesses who face the public face the problems that Marks and Spencers have recently faced. And I'm glad you haven't had those problems, but I'm sure it's something you worry about, is it?
Yes, absolutely. It is something that we worry about constantly. It is still ongoing. It is still very much an issue now to this day. And there's more and more retail organizations that are having these issues. And it seems to be very much organized. It is definitely crime related. And it gets scarier all the time. We are doing everything that we can to batten down the hatches and increasing all of the things that we do normally, awareness, and throughout the whole entire organization with our staff, as well as all of the different things within our security stack, which are vendors and alerting systems that we use that are help us to do that we employ to help to do that.
Well, we're going to talk to you in a bit more detail in a few minutes, but I wanted to start the discussion properly with an overview from Sir Michael Fallon. Now, Michael, you were the UK Defence Secretary at the time of Putin's first invasion of Ukraine, way back in 2014, and you've watched and become an expert in the way Russia is deploying what I think they call hybrid warfare. What's your overview about the global security situation and the way it can affect British business?
Well, back then, even 10 years ago, Russia was using all sorts of techniques of misinformation, planting stories and stirring things up. But 10 years on now, the whole issue of cybersecurity, you've called this a special, Graham. It's no longer special. It's with us now, day in, day out. It's affecting our businesses, we'll come on to discuss. But above all, it's affecting governments. And we talk loosely of hybrid threats, but this is warfare. It's a form of economic warfare. It's being conducted by criminals, of course, for money. It's also being conducted by hostile states against us, mainly Russia, but Iran and China as well. And quite often it's being conducted by both together, by criminals in places like Russia who see the opportunity not just to disrupt our government and our business, but to make money in doing so. So this is now the reality. And I'm delighted that you've brought us together to see whether business is doing enough to protect ourselves. Now,
before we look at the actual protection, just look at this threat a little bit more and the reason it is so pernicious. In the Russian economy, there are obviously sanctions, yet the Russian economy doesn't appear to be suffering greatly from sanctions because there is money still flowing in. Is this one of the roots, this criminal activity and hijacking of businesses in the West, that money is flowing in?
Yes, that's why we use the phrase state actors, because there's a very clear link between these criminal gangs operating from Russia and the Russian government, the Russian state itself. And they see this as a very useful form of revenue now. It's helping fill their war chest for the war in Ukraine, and it helps them dodge the sanctions. So they get a double whammy out of this. They can disrupt us, mess us around, but they're also making quite formidable sums of money out of it. And that's why, Graham, the Strategic Defence Review that was published, the kind of 5-yearly review that was published last week, has now identified Russia and the threat from Russia, including cyber, as the main threat affecting this country. More serious than international terrorism, even more serious than the growing threat from China. It's the number one threat now, combining criminality and the Russian state. And we have to make sure we're better protected, better organized to deal with it in government, in business, and then as individuals.
Now, in the review you just talked about, this was the review that also committed to raising the UK national security spending to, or defence spending to 5% of GDP. Now, of course, that is about our submarines, our ships, our air force, our army. But I would assume maybe that the government includes in that 5% now some resilience protection, GCHQ and cyber security that tries to head it off at the pass before it reaches our networks.
Yes, a lot of the spending by the key government agencies, including GCHQ, now it can be rightly classified as defence spending. And the new higher target that NATO adopted at its summit last week with President Trump, the higher target of 5%, will now also include expenditure to protect what we call critical national infrastructure, our airports, our power stations, our telecom networks, the key things that our economy and our society depend on. That too will be classified as security and defence expenditure, and quite rightly.
Now, you're talking about the state and the state's infrastructure that they are, the government is in charge of. But the government protects me via a police force as I walk down the street. If a crime is being committed, then the police can intervene. And the government has an army to protect our shores and navy to protect the sea and so on. Is it possible to have technology that stops some of these actors coming into our networks at all, on our fibre optics and so on, before they reach small businesses or large businesses?
Well, that's harder and harder simply because of the nature of the cyber threat now. And of course, it shouldn't fall just to government. You know, you can't, if you walk down the street waving a very expensive iPhone in front of everybody, you know, you can't be wholly surprised that somebody's going to come up and try and nick it off you. So we have to do things to protect ourselves. Government has to protect the critical national infrastructure and give good advice through the National Cyber Security Centre. But business has to protect its own supply chains, has to protect its customer bases. And then we all have to improve our own digital hygiene, I think they call it. We have to protect our own accounts. We have to protect our passwords, our account details. So this is something in which we all actually have to work together. Of course, government takes the lead, but there is a responsibility on us, on our businesses, and on ourselves, you know, to play our part in this as well.
Now, in my business, as a PR person, we do a lot of crisis management PR. And Darcy, you might not be surprised to hear, but I wonder if our audience would, that a large proportion since January of our crisis calls have been from clients who have been attacked and had ransomware attacks from Russia quite often.
Right.
And they've wanted advice on how to deal with the PR fallout of that. And it's not just the actual ransom that they may want or not to pay, but it's also the reputation, which is a killer.
Oh, it is. It definitely is. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, if we look at ourselves just as consumers, I mean, how many times have you thought about, oh, I don't want to deal with that particular organization because they were just on the news, because they were hacked. I feel very wary of my data. I feel very wary of my financial information, all of that kind of stuff. And so even if it was months ago, if it was in the news about a business that had suffered an attack of some sort, it does affect you as a consumer. And to be in the retail industry, that's what we think about every day. We think about that, how it would affect our social media, our reputation, our customer base, all of those things. And because we have to, if anything should happen ever, and it had before, you have to reply and announce to the ICO and the governing bodies that you have been attacked, And of course, it has to be announced to your customers or potential customers or your customer base that something has happened, and you have to. It's the law. And so suffering the backlash of that reputation is something that you just have to have a little bit of it in your DR program, in your disaster recovery. How are we going to recover completely from this? And that's one of the lasting effects, unfortunately.
I was shopping at Marks and Spencer's. I've gladly shopped at Marks and Spencer's to support them. I like some of their stuff, so I haven't been put off. But it has been obvious that they've had trouble over the last few months. It seems to be recovering. I want to tell you a story, a real story, without putting any names of companies, because that would be counterproductive. I had a phone call a few months ago from a company. It wasn't a retailer. It was a supply chain business in industry. And they had been ransomwared, and all of their servers had been locked up. They couldn't do anything. It was amazing how many things were on a server, not in the cloud. They hadn't gone to the cloud. And when it has been resolved now, but the cause of it was that a member of staff had been shopping online, and the member of staff had used their work email and their work password to create an account at a retailer. The retailer had been hacked a year or so ago, and therefore the data was on some dark web blacklist that had been sold. And the explanation was given that AI, together with bad actors, had managed to sort out data through the email address and the password and get into this company.
Oh, of course.
And it's the confluence of human error,
Right.
AI,
Right.
and a bad actor that caused that company to have many weeks of difficulties.
Of course.
Of course, that is the methodology. The cause was evil intent.
Absolutely.
But the methodology was all those things. Well, if you take that, and I'm sure that's something that you would war game, what advice would you give? What do you tell your staff about their digital hygiene?
Absolutely. So that is one of the largest parts of my role. That is a large part of every role that's like mine within an organizations, is to teach awareness, training, and it's got to be consistent, as well as that is also a very large part of our compliance that we must do. And it has to be, it's a never ending route of a bus of compliance in order to make sure everyone is trained consistently and constantly about these things. One of the biggest things, of course, is never use the same passwords for everything. We are all being socially engineered. We're all on LinkedIn. We're all on social media. We're proud of where we work. We want to shout about it. We want to have our network grow. And of course, we are in the limelight. And so with that, we are spearphished, and we are, once a password has been compromised, and of course that you have ways of finding out whether it has been, you've got to realize that you've got to be original with every single password. That's why majority of your passwords that you put in nowadays are actually recommended with your LastPass, or whether that be controlled by your phone or your laptop or what have you. When it actually gives you a recommended password, go ahead and take it. Either that, or maintain some sort of method within your own head in order to always consistently change those passwords for everything.
And of course, with retailers, the other thing is that the credit card information, the debit card information,
Right.
and without going into the technical details, you do quite often have, when these hacks and ransomware have happened, people reassured that their credit card information wasn't compromised.
Right.
And is that because it's done in a different way, the two-factor authentication, for example?
Yes. So majority of, let's say, retail organizations like ours, we do all that we can to be able to wick away all transactional data away from ourselves. We don't hold, store, move, use credit card data in any way, shape, or form. We call it CHD. And usually that will be wicked away to your chosen, preferred partnership with a platform, a payment platform. And so we don't even see it. And so if we were compromised in any way, those credit card details, or CHD as we call it, would not go with it in any way. It would just be personal data. So the sensitive data that's very minor in a way, it would be your name, address, mobile number, maybe gender, and email address, things like that.
Now, I'm going to ask your opinion on something. I'm not going to ask your company's policy on it.
Sure.
So your opinion on it. If a company, like my manufacturing supply chain company, is asked for £500,000 or £1 million to unlock their servers,
Right.
is your opinion that they should negotiate with the hijackers?
Never, ever negotiate with hackers. Just trash everything, bin everything, start again, set it on fire, call it a loss, and build again.
That's fascinating. The company that I was involved with in this issue did just that. They went to the local electronics shop, Currys, and bought loads of laptops and started again.
Right.
And of course, that took many weeks and cost a lot of money.
Right.
Multiple tens of thousands of pounds just for the hardware and the interruption and retraining. But that's a very interesting, right at the level you're at, a multi-market business,
right.
You would start again.
Well, it's extortion. It's blackmail. The blackmailer never stops. They will continue and continue and continue.
Michael, when you were Defence Secretary, was it be your instinct, if it happened to government, to advise government not to give in to the blackmailer?
Absolutely, and that's the very firm recommendation to business. But we did find businesses here, and I'm afraid businesses in the United States as well, quietly, just paying up, hoping that it would all go away. And of course it doesn't. It comes back again with a vengeance. So it is very, very important that people don't pay up. And, if they are in very real difficulties, that they get in touch with the National Cybersecurity Centre and the police.
Okay. Now, we're going to bring Neil in, but just before I bring you in, Neil, we've talked a little bit about the human element from you, Darcy, and that's what we're going to talk to Neil about. But in the bigger businesses like yours, you also have firewalls and triggers that tell you, almost a radar that you're under attack, don't you?
Sure, absolutely. So in my type of role, of course, we have a cybersecurity, information security strategy in which you have a security stack of all of the vendors, suppliers, technologies that, of course, outsourced, and some, possibly in-house built, that kind of thing, that cover the alerting system and sometimes mitigation, whether it be cutting off different sections of your infrastructure, things like that, if they feel like they are under attack, all of those things. And we've got this full-on security stack. But then there is the biggest one, especially in retail, because there are so many people doing so many different things that are very much online. They're on social media, they're on TikTok, they're on Instagram, things like that, LinkedIn, and they are being socially engineered. And the first thing that we need to do is establish the human firewall. I like to liken it, when I'm describing it to the staff, as I'm flying the security plane for the organization. You are passengers. Look out the window for me and make sure that there's nothing dangling off the wing. And I've got my measurements and my dials and instruments that are all tuned in to help me fly that plane. But you're going to help me even more so. You're going to let me know when something is not working.
Now, that is a perfect segue for Neil, because Bob's business, it sounds like a cute little small business, but it isn't a cute little small business. It's a cute business, but it's not. It's quite significant. It's a UK-based cybersecurity training provider. It's been going since 2007, and it helps companies transform their organizational security. They've got big clients like the government and educational institutions and financial firms. So Bob's business, Neil, give us some comments on what you've heard so far, and then we'll talk about what service you offer.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting conversation. I think the human element's always going to be a big part of everything. we can't shy away from the fact that a lot of breaches start from human error. Let me rephrase that. They don't start from human error. They involve human error. Because ultimately, good cybersecurity is a combination of technology, process, and people. And it's often, these hackers are going to be targeting people because human nature, people are going to make mistakes and errors. And that's where they're really focusing that effort at the minute, because you can't, and the human firewall comments are a really good one, but ultimately that will be penetrated at some point, because it's highly sophisticated attacks these days, which are more prevalent than ever.
And do you take the point I made about AI? It is sort of turbocharging them. I just put a slide up with some data, and you can see that since the Ukraine war started, and this is slides from the data from the Information Commissioner's Office for Q1 of the year 21, 22, 23, 24, and you can see the growth of registered cyber attacks with the Information Commissioner's Office just growing exponentially in the first quarter of each of these years. It shows you the pattern.
Yeah, it's absolutely huge, isn't it?
So do you think it's just bad actors and Russia, or do you think the technology and the AI is turbocharging it?
I think the AI particularly, it's making it very easily accessible for people to find things about people online or organisations online. I liken it to where everybody on an individual level or an organisational level, because we're all starting to become more digital by default, we're actually increasing our attack surface constantly around data. So we're putting more out there all the time. So therefore, with a bigger attack surface, there's more information readily available. So therefore, more attacks are going to naturally come.
Now, because you talked about the human element, and quite often the talking in the media is about technology and what we're doing to stop it, technology, what are our firewalls like, but the human element is really important. And I know that from my own business, I run a small business, and my team are trying to focus on what they're doing. They haven't got their mind on cyber security. They haven't got their mind on whether that email is a fake email or whether it's phishing. So how do you encourage and retrain people to have a different mindset?
I think importantly, it's about framing the why it's important on an individual basis and also an organisational basis. I think the comment earlier with the aeroplane, I think is a really, really good comment, and it's a good scenario. And the statement that you made was around kind of empowering people to look out the window. I think a lot of people who work in organisations tend to think that their IT teams or their tech teams are going to be the ones that are going to be stopping this from happening. Whereas in reality, I don't think people feel empowered enough generally, unless they've had that level of awareness and training where they feel that they can actually be a big part of the solution and not necessarily part of the problem.
How do we train our staff? I mean, it could be staff that are doing regular things. I know a forklift truck driver that gets their manifest instructions on an email on a phone. It could be somebody who's working in accounts. It could be somebody who's working on a project in the office. They're all doing different jobs. How do you train them to have a common level of vigilance?
So I always say this about training and awareness are two very different things. Awareness is really, training is part of awareness. And what awareness does is actually provide the context for people, the reason why it's important to them on an individual basis. And therefore, once they've got that hook and that buy-in as to why it's important to them, then there are a number of options from a training perspective, whether it be traditional e-learning, face-to-face events, people learn in different ways, even simulated phishing attacks that you can do for your organisation, which I know can sometimes be controversial for people, whether they feel they're effective or not, but it's effectively the modern day scenario based training. So there are a number of different ways in which people can learn. It's just if you can get an understanding for an organisational level what those threats are, what those job roles are, and what they're more likely to be targeted with, then you can really hone your awareness training campaigns to suit the individual as well as the organisation.
So a simulated attack is rather like a fire drill, and we're mandated to have fire drills. We have fire drills at least twice a year in our office because you have to, and then tick the box. People know where the fire exit is. Do you ever do any simulations?
Well, because of compliance and the things that we have to do that are actually regulated, that's a part of GDPR, we have to do all of the things in order to train and make people aware of all sorts of different kinds of attacks. And that is one big part of it. Absolutely. I don't think that's going to go away. The more technical and more elaborate that attacks are being made across all industries by these bad actors, we have to kind of be we can't be one step ahead, but very, very close in the same race, and making them aware of what is on that threat landscape and how that they can protect themselves from it. So being able to point out different clues, if you will, and actually just sometimes just stop, take a breath. If something makes you feel funny, don't click on it, don't open it, make somebody else aware, that kind of thing. Now, I mean, organizations do have security vendors and technologies that are across their email systems, email gateways, AI, scanning methods, and all of that stuff, which are just incredibly highly technical and almost mind-blowing of how well that they can do it. They're actually learning the types of emails that come through your company and who they normally contact, who they normally interact with, the body of emails. Do they sound and feel like the person that you've always been talking to? Because it could very well be somebody, the sender, who has been attacked, and there's a man in the middle who is acting as them using their actual email address. So there's all sorts of different, very highly just evolved types of attacks when it comes through email.
Yes. So, my next door neighbour is an elderly man. He told me he'd had an email from my home email, but my email address was spammed, and he hadn't had. And I'm very sad for him. My own little firm, I've introduced, do not open if you're not sure where this email's come from. But people can go blind to that, can't they, Neil? They're so used to seeing it on their email screen. So give us some tips, simple tips, very basic hygiene.
Yeah, I think the efficacy of that does wear off at times, particularly around phishing. Some of the tips around that is more around the bit that comes before it. So a lot of organisations will go straight into phishing simulations or phishing training, but actually the education tips need to be around people's digital footprint, what they're posting online. How open source intelligence is used to create a picture of them so that they can then be spearphished, because we mentioned how effective spearphishing can be. So I often say to people, kind of treat your work life and your home life online as two separate boxes to reduce that attack surface. Otherwise, most people are going to be social engineered or phished using something that's going to actually relate to them on a personal level. That's where people tend to click on things. So just reduce that attack surface by boxing off areas of your personal and work life.
Before I conclude with you, Neil, I just wanted to give you the chance to give a kind of indication of what people can buy from your service, because smaller businesses cannot afford tens of thousands of pounds of retained services, but you are able to provide some kind of comfort and support. Tell us the kind of things that you offer.
Yeah, so we're primarily e-learning and phishing simulation provider, but what we do that's quite unique is we're very bespoke and tailored. So we really, really work with the organisation to understand their attack surface by doing things like vulnerability assessments, both as at an organisational level and then also as an individual level, a human vulnerability assessment. They're mapped across to the CyBOK report that the NCSC put together a few years ago. So we tend to work with them on really holistic awareness campaigns that relate specifically to the risks that they may face. And with that creates really high engagement. So we're effectively an organisation that really tries to empower the staff within the organisation we work for to actually look at cybersecurity as a positive, because it's very fear driven. A lot of this conversation, quite rightly, is about all of the fear around it. So what happens is members of organisation staff, they fear it so much that they freeze, they don't do anything, whereas we want that action of reporting, because again, we talk about phishing. The most important metric in phishing is how many people are actually reporting things to the IT team. They feel empowered to actually report and think, well, this looks a bit dodgy. This is suspicious. I'm going to report it into the IT team, as opposed to maybe I shouldn't do it.
And for firms that don't have an IT team?
So again, we work particularly from a managed service perspective. So we work quite closely with those organisations to obviously overcome those barriers.
Darcy, this is very much chiming with your actual implementation.
Right.
I don't want to tempt fate, but so far you've had a reasonably good track record.
Well, and for the last 5 years, that's for sure. It's never 100% foolproof. You are never 100% safe. I mean, we all have to know that. I think a little bit of fear instilled in everyone is a little bit good. I mean, you don't want them to freeze in fear, but you want them to stop, listen, look, take a breath. How does it make you feel? That kind of thing. So you want to instill that. You want to make everybody aware of keeping your eyes and ears open. So,
well, I'm going to conclude with Michael, because I've got a couple of little questions to pick up on him, little pop questions, I suppose, Michael. You were a senior government minister who was protected. You were defence secretary, you had bodyguards and everything like that to protect your person. And I'm sure that you were told you had to take measures to protect yourself in case of something physical going wrong. Were you told how to interact on your mobile phone or your email? Were you warned about things, or were you kept from that? Was someone doing it?
No. You're warned. You know exactly what how vulnerable your phone is, how vulnerable an iPad is. You're warned of these things. Not to leave equipment out that could possibly record conversations that you weren't aware it was recording. So you're warned about the personal equipment that you have and how careful you have to be in using it. And you're also, of course, you're aware the whole time of various security classifications. And you'll have to be very careful, obviously, who you're talking to, whether you're discussing something that is top secret or simply confidential. So you are kind of security minded because you're dealing in that environment the whole time when you're talking to other ministers, whether you're talking to allies or whether you're talking to other members of NATO. Because
this element of human error, we've just heard Neil and Darcy talking about, this happened in America with Donald Trump's defense secretary and his national security people talking, and they accidentally let a journalist into their conversation on a social app. So obviously embarrassing, but also quite serious.
Yes, it's extraordinary that has happened. And, WhatsApp was rather after my time as Defence Secretary, but it is extraordinary how that group was, allowed to be constituted and by accident included a journalist. We take pretty strict precautions. In fact, a subsequent Defence Secretary had to resign because of a leak from the National Security Council to make it very clear that when you're dealing with the highest level of security right at the top of government, all of us are under a duty to apply the very strictest standards possible.
One last question. Does Britain, America, and the West have the ability, and could they ever launch cyber attacks in response?
We've used offensive cyber militarily. We've used it against the Daesh in the campaign to get ISIS-Daesh out of Iraq and Syria. I authorized the use of offensive cyber when we were trying to liberate Mosul. So our military have the techniques to use cyber to attack. And that derives from the fact you have to know how to protect yourself against a cyber attack. So obviously you've developed the capability to do it. But it's very strictly regulated. It can't just be done by anybody of any rank. It's something that has to be authorized by a senior minister, and it's only done in very rare circumstances, which in these circumstances was to help liberate a city on behalf of the Iraqi army and get rid of Daesh.
Well, Michael, thank you for that. And thanks for taking us from the global security down to something practical in a real business and something that can be applied with Bob's business to other businesses. And congratulations on your business, because I know that you've been part of the Yorkshire Security cyber net cluster, Neil, and I'm sure that people may want to talk to you to take some advice in the coming weeks. Thank you very much. That's it for our Northern Business Podcast for the summer. We'll be back in September. If you want to join us as a guest, do get in touch. We want to hear from you, and we'll be returning on the 10th of September for our first episode of the new season. Thanks to our podcast producer Alex Dryden and our technical operator Robin Campbell. From me, goodbye.